Agatha Christie. Double sin. I entered the apartment of my friend Poirot and found him in a state of extreme exhaustion and acute irritation. There were more than enough reasons for his annoyance, as every wealthy lady who had misplaced a bracelet or lost a kitten seemed to turn, without a second thought, to the great Hercule Poirot for help. In the nature of my famous friend, a calm Flemish industriousness and a fervent artistic zeal were strangely combined. Thanks to the prevailing influence of the former quality, he investigated a multitude of cases that held very little interest for him. He could also be satisfied with a very modest monetary, or even purely spiritual, reward and take on an investigation solely because the proposed case had piqued his curiosity. As a result of this heavy workload, as I have already mentioned, he had become severely overtired. He admitted it himself, and it was not difficult for me to persuade him to go with me on a week-long holiday to Ebermouth, a famous resort on the south coast. We had spent 4 wonderful days there when Poirot suddenly approached me. "Mon ami," he said, "do you remember my friend Joseph Aarons, the impresario?" After a moment's thought, I nodded. Poirot's circle of friends was vast and diverse. It included everyone from dustmen to dukes with equal ease. "Well, Hastings, Joseph Aarons is currently in Charlotte Bay. Things are not going entirely well for him there, and there is one particular matter that seems to be troubling him deeply. He is asking me to stop by and see him. I think, mon ami, that I must fulfill his request. In the past, Joseph Aarons has proven his devotion to me many times, assisting in various cases, and generally, he is a fine and reliable man." "Well, of course, if you think so," I said. "I imagine Charlotte Bay is also a lovely spot, and by the way, I have not had the chance to visit it yet." "Then we shall combine business with pleasure," said Poirot. "You would not mind looking up the train schedule, would you?" "We will probably have to make 1 or 2 changes," I said with a wince. "You know what our railways are like. A journey from the south coast of Devon to the north can take an entire day. However, after making inquiries, I found that we could manage with only 1 change and that the train schedule was quite convenient." I hurried back to the hotel to share this news with Poirot, but on the way back, an advertisement for an excursion bus office caught my eye. "Tomorrow, a 1-day excursion to Charlotte Bay. Departing at 8:30 in the morning, the route passes through the most picturesque parts of Devon." Having gathered some details and inspired by this new idea, I returned to the hotel. Unfortunately, it was difficult to convince Poirot to use this bus. "My friend, where does this love for excursion buses come from? Do you not know that trains are the most reliable form of transport? Their tires do not burst. Their motors do not break down. You do not suffer the discomfort of an excessive abundance of fresh air. The windows can always be closed to avoid drafts." I delicately hinted that it was precisely the abundance of fresh air that I found so attractive about a trip in an open-top bus. "And if it rains? Your English climate is most changeable, but there's a folding top or some kind of canvas cover. Besides, if it rains heavily, the excursion will not take place." "Ah!" Poirot exclaimed. "Then our only hope is for rain." "Of course, if that is how you feel, and—" "Oh, no, no, mon ami. I see that you have your heart set on such a journey. Fortunately, I have brought my overcoat and 2 warm scarves." He sighed. "But will we have enough time in Charlotte Bay?" "Well, I am afraid we shall have to spend the night there. You see, the route goes across the Dartmoor Plateau. We stop for lunch in Munchampton. We should arrive in Charlotte Bay by 4 o'clock, and only an hour later the bus departs for the return trip, arriving back here at 10 o'clock in the evening." "Indeed," said Poirot. Can there really be people who consider such a trip a pleasure? Since we are not taking the return journey, we should, of course, receive a discount on the ticket price. I think that is unlikely. One must be persistent. Oh, come now, Poirot, do not be so petty. My friend, it is not pettiness at all, but a sound business approach. Even if I were a millionaire, I would still prefer to pay only for what is fair and reasonably justified. However, as I had foreseen, Poirot's attempts to get a discount were doomed to failure. The clerk selling tickets at the excursion bureau was impassive and adamant. He insisted that we must pay for the return. He even hinted that if we wished to leave the tour at Charlotte Bay, we ought to pay an extra fee for such a privilege. Defeated, Poirot paid the required sum and left the office. Oh, these English, they never show any sense in monetary matters, he grumbled. Did you notice the young man, Hastings, who paid the full fare while mentioning that he intended to get off the bus at Munchampton? I don't think I noticed. Actually, you were staring with both eyes at the charming young lady who took a ticket for seat number 5, and we shall end up being her neighbors. Ah, yes, my friend, I understand everything. It was because of her that when I tried to book seats 13 and 14, the most comfortable and reliable seats in the middle of the carriage, you abruptly interrupted me, declaring that seats 3 and 4 would suit us best. Really, Poirot, I said, flushing. Auburn curls. Always those auburn curls. In any case, she was more worthy of attention than some strange young fellow. It all depends on the point of view. I, for instance, was more interested in that young man. I glanced quickly at Poirot, surprised by his rather significant tone. Why is that? What do you mean? Oh, do not be so agitated. Let us say he caught my eye because his attempts to grow a mustache have been quite lamentable. Poirot lovingly smoothed his own magnificent mustache. Cultivating a mustache, he purred, is a true art. I sympathize with anyone who tries to master it. It is always difficult to tell when Poirot is being serious and when he is merely amusing himself. I did not continue the conversation, realizing that silence would be my best course of action. The following morning was bright and sunny. The day promised to be magnificent. Poirot, however, decided to take no risks. In addition to a warm suit, he put on a wool waistcoat, an overcoat, 2 scarves, and a raincoat. Furthermore, he brought a pack of anti-influenza tablets, not failing to swallow 2 of them before leaving. Our luggage consisted of a pair of small flat suitcases. The pretty girl we had noticed yesterday also had a small suitcase, as did the young man who, as I had suspected, was the object of Poirot's sympathy. The other excursionists had no luggage at all. The driver put our cases in the luggage compartment, and we took our seats on the bus. Poirot, quite maliciously, I think, suggested that I take the window seat since I was always craving fresh air, while he took the middle seat next to our charming neighbor. Soon, however, he rectified the situation. The man in the next seat, seat number 6, turned out to be a loud fellow prone to playful and inappropriate jokes, and Poirot quietly asked the girl if she would like to change places with him. She gratefully accepted his offer, and as a result of this change, she entered into conversation with us. Soon, all 3 of us were chatting pleasantly and naturally. She was obviously very young, no more than 19, and as naive as a child. Soon she told us the reason for her trip. Apparently, she was running an errand for her aunt, who was the owner of a wonderful antique shop in Evermouth. After the death of her father, her aunt had lived in very straitened circumstances and decided to use her small capital and the large family collection she had inherited to start her own business. Her affairs were highly successful, and soon her shop became very popular. Our new acquaintance, Mary Durrant, had moved in with her aunt to learn the trade, and she found the work much more to her liking than being a governess or a companion in someone else's house. Poirot listened with interest and nodded approvingly. "I am sure, mademoiselle, that luck will be with you," he remarked gallantly. "But allow me to give you a small piece of advice. Do not be too trusting, mademoiselle. The world is full of rogues and swindlers. They might even be found on our very bus. Caution never hurts." She stared at him, her mouth slightly open, and Poirot nodded knowingly. "Believe me, I do not exaggerate. Who knows? Even I, with my wise advice, could turn out to be a cruel and cunning criminal." Looking at our companion's surprised face, he gave her an even more mischievous wink. We stopped for lunch in Munchampton, and after a few words with the waiter, Poirot managed to secure a separate table for the three of us by the window. In the large inner courtyard, about 20 excursion buses were gathered. They had come from all parts of the country. The hotel dining room was crowded, and the noise was considerable. "The holiday spirit here is quite overwhelming," I said, looking around disapprovingly. Mary Durrant agreed. "Yes, the atmosphere in Ebermouth has quite changed in the summer. My aunt says it used to be entirely different. Now there are so many visitors that one can hardly walk through the streets. But that is good for business, mademoiselle. Not particularly for ours. We deal only in rare and valuable items. We do not handle cheap antiques. My aunt's clients live in all parts of England. If they wish to acquire a table or chairs of a certain style, or old porcelain, they write to her, and sooner or later she finds those pieces for them. That is exactly what happened in this case." We watched her with interest as she continued her explanation. "A certain American gentleman, a Mr. J. Baker Wood, was known as a connoisseur and collector of miniatures. Recently, a very interesting set of miniatures had appeared on the antique market, and Miss Elizabeth Penn, Mary's aunt, had purchased them. She sent Mr. Wood a description of the miniatures, stating their price. He soon replied that he was ready for the transaction if the miniatures were indeed genuine, and requested that someone meet him in Charlotte Bay. Therefore, Miss Durrant had been sent there as a representative of the firm. Of course, they are charming little things," she said, "but I cannot imagine anyone agreeing to pay such a large sum for them. £500 is frightening to think of. Their authorship is attributed to Causeway, if I remember correctly. I'm already quite confused by all these things." Poirot smiled. "You still lack experience, do you not, mademoiselle?" "I lack the proper education," Mary said regretfully. "Our upbringing did not involve knowledge of antiques. One must study a great deal for that." She sighed. Then, suddenly, I saw her eyes widen in surprise. She was sitting facing the window, and her gaze was now fixed on the inner courtyard of the hotel. Hurriedly murmuring something, she rose from the table and almost ran out of the dining room. She returned a few minutes later, breathless and embarrassed. "Oh, forgive me for dashing off so suddenly, but I thought a man was taking my suitcase from our bus. I ran up to him, but it turned out he was taking his own luggage. Such things happen to me often. I feel so foolish. It looked as if I were accusing him of theft." She laughed at the thought. Poirot, however, did not even smile. "Who was this man, mademoiselle? Describe him to me." He was in a brown suit, a thin, lanky young man with a rather strange little mustache. "Uh-huh," said Poirot. "Our acquaintance from yesterday, Hastings. Do you know this young man, mademoiselle? Have you met him before?" "No, never." "Why do you ask?" "It is of no consequence. It is quite curious, that is all." He fell into silence again, and took no part in the further conversation until Miss Durrant said something that caught his attention. "Pardon, mademoiselle, what did you say?" "I said that on the way back, I must be wary of the villains you spoke of. As far as I know, Mr. Wood usually pays in cash. If I have £500 in banknotes with me, I might attract the attention of some villains." She laughed, but Poirot did not join her. Instead, he asked which hotel she intended to stay at in Charlotte Bay. "At the Anchor Hotel. It is small and inexpensive, but quite decent." "Tiens," said Poirot. "The Anchor Hotel. That is exactly where, if I recall, you intended to stay, Hastings. What a remarkable coincidence." He winked at me. "And will you be in Charlotte Bay for long?" Mary asked. "Only for one night. I'm going there on business. I am sure, mademoiselle, that you could not guess my profession." I saw Mary mentally go through several possibilities and reject them, likely out of caution. Finally, she ventured a guess that Poirot was a conjurer. He was greatly amused by this suggestion and readily seized upon it. "Ah, what a wonderful idea. You think I pull rabbits out of hats?" "No, mademoiselle. My profession is more concerned with solving the tricks. You see, a conjurer makes things disappear. I, on the contrary, find out where the disappeared things have gone." He leaned forward with a mysterious air to give weight to his words. "It is a secret, mademoiselle, but I will tell you in confidence. I am a private detective." Poirot leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the effect he had produced. Mary Durrant stared at him as if spellbound. But all further talk was interrupted by the chorus of roaring horns in the courtyard, announcing to all passengers that the road monsters were ready to continue their journey. Poirot and I went outside. I remarked that, thanks to our charming companion, lunch had been quite delightful. Poirot agreed. "I do not deny she is charming. She is also quite foolish, do you not find?" "Foolish? There is no offense intended. A girl can be a red-haired beauty and still be foolish. Her frankness and trust toward two strange men are the height of folly. Well, perhaps she realized we were respectable people. My friend, your remark is, to say the least, unwise. Anyone who knows their, shall we say, trade, would naturally try to make a respectable impression. Remember how lightly she mentioned she would have to be careful when she receives the £500? But she already has the £500 in the form of miniatures. Precisely, in the form of miniatures. Between those two categories of goods, there is little difference, mon ami. But no one knows that except for us, and the waiter, and the people at the next table, and, without a doubt, a group of people in Evermouth. Mademoiselle Durrant is certainly charming, but if I were Elizabeth Penn, I would first and foremost teach my new assistant some common sense." He paused, and then added in a different tone, "You know, my friend, while we were all calmly having lunch here, it would have been remarkably easy to remove any suitcase from those excursion buses. Oh, come now, Poirot. Someone would surely have noticed such an attempt. And who would notice someone taking their own luggage? It could be done in an open and natural manner, and no one would even think to interfere. You think, Poirot, are you suggesting? But that fellow in the brown suit, he did take his own suitcase." Poirot frowned. "Perhaps so. And yet, Hastings, it is rather strange that he did not take his suitcase immediately upon the bus's arrival at the stand. As you may have noticed, he was not with us during lunch. If Miss Durrant had not been sitting opposite the window, she might not have noticed him at all," I said thoughtfully. "And since the suitcase turned out to be his, it mattered not at all," said Poirot. "Well, let us forget this incident, mon ami." Nevertheless, when we took our seats in the bus and set off, Poirot again took the opportunity to give Mary Durrant further lectures on the dangers of excessive frankness. She listened meekly enough, but evidently treated them more as a joke. We arrived in Charlotte Bay at 4 o'clock, and we were fortunate enough to secure a good room at the Anchor Hotel, a charming, old-fashioned inn. Poirot immediately unpacked his essentials and began tidying his mustache, preparing to pay a visit to Joseph Aarons, when there came a knock at the door. I said, "Come in," and to my extreme surprise, Mary Durrant appeared on the threshold, her face deathly pale and her eyes filled with tears. "I beg your pardon, but the most terrible thing has happened." "You said you were a detective?" she said, turning to Poirot. "What has happened, mademoiselle?" I opened my suitcase. The miniatures were in a crocodile leather case, locked, of course. And now, look, she held out a small square case finished in crocodile skin. The lid hung loose. The case had been forced open. It would have required considerable strength. The marks of the break-in were quite obvious. Poirot examined it and nodded. "And the miniatures?" he asked, though we both knew perfectly well what the answer would be. "Gone. Stolen." "Oh, what am I to do now?" "Do not worry," I said. "My friend is Hercule Poirot. You must have heard of him. If anyone can recover them for you, it is he. Monsieur Poirot, the famous Monsieur Poirot." Poirot possessed enough vanity to be pleased by the clear and deep respect in her voice. "Yes, my child," he said, "it is I in person. You may entrust me with the solution of your little affair. I shall do everything possible, but I fear very much that it is already too late. Tell me, was the lock of your suitcase also forced?" She shook her head. "Allow me, I shall examine it myself." We went to her room, and Poirot carefully inspected the suitcase. It was obvious that it had been opened with a key. That was not difficult. There are not so many variations in suitcase locks. Eh bien, we must call the police, and we must also contact Mr. Bakerwood as soon as possible. I went with him and asked what he meant by saying it might be too late. "Mon cher, I said today that I could solve tricks, could discover disappeared things. But suppose someone has already forestalled me. Do you not understand? Wait a moment." He disappeared into a telephone box. About 5 minutes later, he came out looking grim. "It has happened as I feared. Half an hour ago, a lady visited Mr. Wood. She said she had come on behalf of Elizabeth, Pennsylvania. He was delighted with the miniatures and paid the required sum immediately. Half an hour ago, even before we arrived here." Poirot smiled somewhat enigmatically. "Buses, of course, have a good speed, but, for example, a motor car from Munchampton could have arrived here at least an hour before us. And what are we to do now? My good Hastings, you are always interested in the practical side. We shall inform the police and do all we can for Miss Durrant, and yes, I most definitely think we should speak with Mr. J. Bakerwood. She will certainly catch it from her aunt," Poirot remarked as we approached the seaside hotel where Mr. Wood was staying, "which will be only fair. Is it not foolish to go off to lunch, leaving articles valued at £500 in a suitcase? And yet, mon ami, there are a couple of strange circumstances in this little affair. For instance, why was it necessary to break open that little case? To take out the miniatures. But is that not foolish? Suppose our thief decided to rummage in the luggage compartment during lunch on the pretext that he needed to fetch his own things. Surely it would have been simpler to open Miss Durrant's suitcase and remove the leather case without opening it. He wanted to make sure the miniatures were there." Poirot looked at me doubtfully, but as we had reached Mr. Wood's room, we had no more time for discussion. Mr. Bakerwood inspired in me an immediate feeling of dislike. He was a large, flamboyant man, dressed with too much flash and too little taste. A ring with an enormous diamond sparkled on his finger. He struck me as nothing more than a loud-mouthed bully. Naturally, he had suspected nothing wrong. Why should he? The woman, as arranged, said she had brought the miniatures. Exceptionally fine collector's pieces they were, too. Had he noted the numbers of the banknotes? No, of course not. And anyway, who were you, Mr. Poirot, to be asking all these questions? I shall ask you nothing more, except for one thing. Describe the woman who came to see you. Was she young and beautiful? No, sir, not at all. Emphatically not. A tall, gray-haired woman of middle age, with a blotchy face and a budding mustache. A charmer? Not by any means. Poirot, I exclaimed as we went out into the corridor. A mustache. Did you hear? I still have good hearing. Thank you, Hastings. But what an unpleasant man. Yes, his manners leave much to be desired. Well, we shall be able to catch this thief, I remarked. We shall be able to recognize him. Hastings, you are as naive and simple-minded as a child. Do you not know that there is such a thing as an alibi? You think he has provided himself with an alibi? Poirot's reply was unexpected. I sincerely hope so. Your trouble is, I said, that you love to complicate everything. Quite right, mon ami. I do not like, as you say, a sitting duck. Poirot's prophecy was fully confirmed. Our fellow passenger in the brown suit turned out to be a Mr. Norton Kane. In Munchampton, he had gone straight to the George Hotel and spent the entire day there. The only evidence against him was Miss Durrant's statement that she had seen him taking his luggage from the bus during our lunch, which in itself is not at all a suspicious action, Poirot remarked thoughtfully. After that, he suddenly fell silent and refused further discussion of the case, saying that when I pressed him, he thought mostly of mustaches, and that I would be wise to reflect on the matter myself. I discovered, however, that he had asked Joseph Aarons, with whom he spent the evening, to tell him as much as possible about Mr. Baker Wood. Given that both men were staying in the same hotel, there was a chance to gather some scraps of information. But whatever Poirot found out, he kept to himself. Mary Durrant, after numerous interviews with the police, returned to Ebermouth by the first morning train. We had breakfast with Joseph Aarons, and after that, Poirot announced to me that he had settled, to everyone's satisfaction, the problems of his impresario friend, and that we could return to Ebermouth whenever we pleased. But not by bus, mon ami. This time we shall go by train. Are you afraid of the traveling expenses, or of meeting another damsel in distress? Both those things, Hastings, could happen to me on a train. No, I am in a hurry to return to Ebermouth because I wish to continue the investigation of our case. Our case? But certainly, my friend. Mademoiselle Durrant asked me to help her. If her case has been handed over to the police, it does not follow that I can wash my hands of it. I came here to do a small service for my old friend, but let it never be said that Hercule Poirot abandoned a stranger in trouble, he concluded grandiosely, puffing out his chest. I think your interest began even earlier, I remarked shrewdly, at the Excursion Bureau, when you first saw that young man with the mustache, though I cannot understand why you noticed him. Can you not, Hastings? You might have. Well, let that remain my little secret. Before leaving Charlotte Bay, we had a brief talk with the police inspector in charge of the case. He had already spoken with Mr. Norton Kane and told Poirot in confidence that the young man's manner had not made a favorable impression. He had been very nervous, saying one thing and then retracting it. But exactly how the trick was worked, I do not know, the inspector admitted. He might have passed the things to an accomplice who drove here once. True, that is only a possibility. We must find both the car and the accomplice, and then pin them down. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Do you believe that is how it happened? I inquired when we boarded the train. No, my friend. The matter was quite different. It was more cleverly conceived. Will you share thoughts? Not yet. You know my weakness. I like to keep my little secrets until the very end. And is the end near? It is near now. We arrived in Ebermouth in the evening at about 6:15, and Poirot went immediately to the Elizabeth Penn shop. The establishment was already closed, but Poirot rang the bell decisively, and soon Mary herself opened the door and expressed surprise and joy at seeing us. Please come in and meet my aunt, she said. She led us into a back room. An elderly lady came forward. She had silver-gray hair, a delicate pink flush, and blue eyes, and she looked very much like a miniature herself. Her somewhat stooped back was covered by a shawl of priceless old lace. Is it really the famous Monsieur Poirot? She asked in a low, melodious voice. Mary told me of your acquaintance. Do you truly wish to help us in this matter? What advice can you give us? Poirot looked at her intently and then bowed. Madame Penn, the effect is quite stunning, but you really ought to grow a real mustache. Miss Penn gasped and recoiled. Yesterday your shop was closed, was it not? I was here in the morning, and then I had a headache and went straight home. Not home, madam, for you sought to cure your headache with a change of air, did you not? The air in Charlotte Bay is very fresh and bracing, is it not? He moved toward the door. Lingering on the threshold, he said over his shoulder, You understand that I know everything. Your little comedy must come to an end. His tone was menacing. Her face turned deathly pale, and she nodded in silence. Poirot turned to the girl. Mademoiselle, he said gently, you are young and charming, but taking part in such schemes could lead to your beauty and youth fading behind prison walls. And I, Hercule Poirot, tell you that this would be a fact most worthy of regret. Then he stepped out into the street, and I, utterly bewildered, followed him. From the very beginning, mon ami, I was intrigued. When that young man booked a ticket only as far as Munchampton, I saw that the girl's attention suddenly focused on him. But why? He was not the type of man a woman notices. When we set out on the excursion, I already felt that something was bound to happen. Who saw that young man trying to take the luggage? Mademoiselle, and only Mademoiselle. And remember, she chose the seat facing the window herself. Such a choice is usually uncharacteristic of a woman. And then she comes to us with a story of a robbery, the case broken open, which, as I already told you, was most unwise. And what do we have in the end? Mr. Bakerwood pays good money for stolen goods. Those miniatures must eventually return to Miss Penn. She will sell them again and receive not 500, but 1,000 pounds. I made inquiries and found that her business is quite sluggish. Her shop is on the verge of bankruptcy. And I said to myself, surely the aunt and the niece have conspired. So you never even suspected Norton Kane? Mon ami, with those whiskers of his? A criminal must be either clean-shaven or have excellent mustaches that can be removed at will. But it was a perfect opportunity for the ingenious Miss Penn, the shy and withered old lady with a faint blush, as we saw her. But if she straightens up, puts on men's boots, alters her face with a few unattractive blemishes, and, the crowning touch, adds a few sparse hairs to her upper lip, what then? A masculine woman, Mr. Wood would say, and a man in disguise, we would say. Was she really in Charlotte yesterday? Most certainly. You may remember telling me that the train leaves here at 11 and arrives in Charlotte Bay around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the return train, by the way, is even faster, the one we took. It departs from Charlotte at 5 minutes past 4 and arrives here at 10 minutes to 7. Naturally, there were no miniatures in that case at all. Empty, it was masterfully forced open. Mademoiselle Mary only needed to find a couple of simpletons who would look kindly upon a charming beauty in distress. But one of those simpletons turned out to be not so simple. He turned out to be Hercule Poirot. I could hardly agree with such a conclusion. I said hastily, "So, when you said you were going to help a stranger in trouble, you were deliberately deceiving me." "Yes, that is exactly what you did." "I never thought of deceiving you, Hastings. I merely permitted you to deceive yourself." I was speaking of Mr. Baker Wood, who found himself in a foreign country. His face darkened. When I think of your road swindle, of the unfairly inflated price, of the same fare for a ticket only to Charlotte as for the return trip, I have a great desire to protect this tourist. Though Mr. Wood's manners are unpleasant, though he is, as you would say, not a sympathetic character, but he is a tourist, and we tourists, Hastings, must help one another. I, for one, will always stand by the tourists.